Great. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of People's Union for Civil Liberties, I'm Lara Jasani, the National Secretary of PUCL, and I welcome you all to the PUCL Dialogues. This PUCL Dialogues that we are having, PUCL Dialogues is a series that PUCL has been conducting of online webinars and online meetings to discuss important human rights issues that are relevant in the current context. And this time we are having a PUCL dialogue on something very different even for us, on the international engagement of India in the space of human rights and the role of India in the UN Human Rights Council. Now, one of the reasons why this is important today, and we have a very good array of speakers who will be taking us through the issue, is because India has very recently been elected as one of the 14 members to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The United Nations Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations, which we all know is an international organization comprising of several member states, of which India is also one of the members. More than 193 countries are members of the United Nations. And the Human Rights Council of the United Nations is an intergovernmental body within the UN system, which works to promote and protect human rights across the world. Now, made up of 47 members, it is elected by the UN General Assembly, and it was first created in 2006. India has consistently been a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council, except for the terms when it is required under the statutory provisions to take a break of 1 year before it's because in between its third consecutive term, India has consistently remained a member of the UN Human Rights Council. Now, it's a very important discussion that we are having today on what has India's role been in the Human Rights Council. What is India's performance as far as human rights is concerned? The process with which it has been elected this time. And we all know that there have been growing concerns around human rights in our country. We have all been, seeing various human rights violations, human rights issues coming up. Currently, the special intensive review is going on in India. There have been several criticisms. The matter is under challenge before the Supreme Court. We're also seeing that there have been, increase in hate crimes, hate speech, especially against Muslims and other and members of other minorities. We're also seeing that there have been, increase in police-related crimes, custodial tortures, and we have various other issues that are being, flagged by civil society as well as by people. And we're also seeing that there has been a dismantling of constitutional rights, especially the right to freedoms under the Indian Constitution under Article 19, including the right to speech, the right to protest, the right to form associations and function as human rights bodies in the country. So in this context, the election of India in the Human Rights Council, which was a unanimous election, unanimous nomination that took place, is something that requires us to reflect also on what has India been doing on human rights concerns that have been raised by the citizens of the country, by civil society organizations, and by various groups that have been working for concerns of their community. So this is one of the reasons why we as PUCL also felt that we should have a discussion on this, and it's the right time to have the discussion. Also because the highest body in India on human rights, the National Human Rights Council, we saw recently, get downgraded under the threat of downgrade. And we've seen that, their A accreditation has been deferred twice recently. So in this kind of a scenario, what does it mean India being elected to the Human Rights Council? What do we as civil society feel that India must do? And various other reflections on, India's role in the Human Rights Council. So we're here to discuss some of these issues, and we have a very good, in fact, array of speakers today, starting with Arvind Narayan, who's our very own from PUCL, the National Secretary of PUCL, and I'll be introducing each of the speakers one by one. We also have, following him, Henry Tiffan, a lawyer practicing in the Madurai High Court and very well-known human rights activist, working for human rights defenders and on many of these concerns. Pooja Patel, who will be joining us from the International Service for Human Rights, ISHR, an organization working globally on human rights issues. And also Sajad Hassan from the South Asia Collective, again doing international advocacy and also involved in the review of human rights issues and India's performance. So we will be going to each of these speakers, and I'll also introduce them more in detail as we go to them. But let's first start with our first speaker today. And we'll start with Arvind Narayan, who will give us an introduction also of why is India's role in the international human rights space important? Why is it a constitutional obligation of India to honor its international commitments? What does it mean, India being a part of the Human Rights Council? What are the expectations from India in the Human Rights Council? And basically India's constitutional mandate today to uphold the international commitments. We know that there are several, international conventions that India is party to, that it has ratified. There are several that it has failed to. And these, what does it mean? That if India is not honoring any of its international commitments or not coming up to speed with the requirements of international law. So these are some of the things that Arvind will speak to us about. Arvind, like I said, is the National Secretary of PUCL and President of PUCL Karnataka. He's the author of India's Undeclared Emergency, a very, a well-known, well-read book on constitutionalism and politics of resistance. And he has co-authored and edited key literature on human rights lawyering and LGBTQI rights. He has also closely been involved in the advocacy for LGBTQI rights at the international level and at the national level, and has been part of the team of lawyers who challenged the criminalization of same-sex relationships under Section 377, which was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2018. Welcome, Arvind, and the floor is with you. Please take us through, India, India and the constitutional in the context of the Human Rights Council appointment.
Thanks, Lara, for the very kind introduction. And the mandate which you've given me is to look at the India's role in terms of, is there a constitutional vision in India's foreign policy? And of course, impacting the Human Rights Council deliberations and debates as well. And it's an important question. And why we refuse, or why we as Indians don't engage that much in the question of what's going on in, say, the Human Rights Council or the General Assembly, is pointed out by Amartya Sen, who says India is the size of a continent. If it's the size of a continent, our concerns end up invariably being within. And there's so much going on within the country, we often don't pay any attention to what is going on outside, as it were. And this seminar, or this discussion, is really an effort on our part to say that it's very, very important that we pay attention to what is going on in terms of the foreign policy dimension as well. Because the way Indian foreign policy currently is structured, and we look at, for this presentation, I had a look at Mr. Jaishankar's book. It's called The India Way, to figure out what is it that the foreign minister thinks should be India's foreign policy. And if you read the book, the sense you get is, as far as Mr. Jaishankar is concerned, what he's interested in is what he calls contemporary pragmatism. That is no question of vision, or no question of a larger kind of a framework within one thinks. It's purely transactional. Your relationship with other countries is transactional. You work in the Human Rights Council is transactional. You work in the General Assembly is transactional. There's no larger vision motivating, underlying anything that you do. And of course, the problems with this are very interestingly pointed out too by Pratap Banu Mehta, who makes the point that even if you want to build a larger coalition at an international level, you have to do it around some issue or do it around some values. If you don't stand for anything, nobody's going to stand with you. If your only interest is a self interest, it's actually against your self interest because you can't get people together. And this idea of a vision we had in the past, obviously, in terms of the entire non aligned movement, and the idea of India standing for the global south was very much there. But today, that vision or the idea that we stand for something is really not there in India's foreign policy. It's completely transactional in nature, and that is its flaw, and that is its problem. If you look at in particular, the argument I'm making is that there should be a vision underlying India's foreign policy, and that vision should derive from the Indian Constitution. And just as we hold the Indian government accountable for its violations of the Indian Constitution within the country, we should hold accountable for not standing up for the value of the Constitution in international forums as well. So, in very simple terms, in the Human Rights Council, India's work, India's voting, what India does should be structured by the framework of the Indian Constitution. In the Human Council is the premier that's body in the and what has been again across governments. This is specific government. If you take, for example, its work with respect to, say, civil and political rights, again, the Constitution is clear. We recognize the right to freedom of speech, the right to association, the right to assembly. It's within the Indian constitutional framework. How does India respond to these issues at an international level? Again, our friends who are going to be speaking later will give greater insight into how India behaves or how India acts in international forums. Give you one specific example, one very important the Human Rights Council, which is the mandate of the human rights defenders. When the mandate came up for renewal, there were a number of hostile resolutions which were moved by various countries, various authoritarian stripes, right from China to Egypt to Saudi Arabia. All of it sought to dilute the mandate of human rights defenders. India joined these efforts to attempt to dilute the mandate of the human rights defender. Finally, of course, when the writing was clear, India voted for the resolution. But the point I'm making is in a range of resolutions on civil and political rights, India's efforts always is to dilute the mandate of civil and political rights. And a simple submission I'm making is that is completely contrary to the mandate of the Indian Constitution, and the Indian government should be held to account for its votes in the Human Rights Council, which dilute the mandate on civil and political rights. The second kind of work in the Human Rights Council are what are called country-specific resolutions. When we look at grave human rights violations within the case of one particular country, and there is voting on that particular resolution. And I just went through a couple of resolutions, but I want to take you through one. One is in terms of Syria, and the second is in terms of Palestine. And Syria, for example, uh, even when it came to the gravest human rights violations, such as the condemnation of the Syrian Republic for the use of chlorine gas, or the use of chemical weapons, or the strong condemnation of the Syrian government for attacks against medical facilities, personal vehicles. What is India's position? We abstain. Why do we abstain? Is it in line with the constitutional mandate to protect human rights and to have a larger vision on human rights? Are questions we have never asked. And I think we need to start asking the Indian state these questions as to how are you enforcing? How are you taking forward the values, the visions of the Constitution at the level of the Human Rights Council. Third example, very briefly, is the question of Palestine. Again, the specific point I want to make on Palestine is we have four very remarkable reports by the Special Rapporteur, Francisca Albanese, on the occupied Palestinian territories. And all four reports make the very, very important case that what is happening in Gaza today comes within the legal definition, legal understanding of genocide as per the Genocide Convention. And if it comes with an understanding of genocide as per the Genocide Convention, the Convention on Genocide has the obligation to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So the question we need to ask the Indian state is, if that is your obligation as per the self-assumed obligation, this is a convention we ratified. Nobody is imposing the convention on us. India has ratified the Genocide Convention, so our obligation is to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So the question we have to ask the Indian state is, what have we done to take forward our obligation to both prevent and punish the crime of genocide as happening in the occupied Palestinian territories and in Gaza? And the answer you really have is, we have done absolutely nothing. And the example, the counter example we can give, which we have to give, we are the country which tries to work within the framework of its constitutional mandate when it comes to even the question of foreign policy, is South Africa. I'm sure colleagues and friends in South Africa might have levels of disagreement, but the broad point is, South Africa feels impelled to, to fulfill its obligations to ensure that international law is respected. And that comes through in the way it is approached, in particular, the entire issue of what's going on in Gaza. South Africa, in taking forward its obligation to prevent the crime of genocide or punish the crime of genocide, has filed a case before the International Court of Justice against Israel, making the case that what Israel is committing in Gaza is genocide. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what is India doing as far as the obligations of the Genocide Convention? What is India doing as far as what the special rapporteur is asking us to fulfill in terms of our legal obligations? The answer to both is none. And the answer also is that civil society, we have not put pressure upon the Indian government to say, you have to fulfill your obligations under both the Genocide Convention and the obligations which are pointed out to by the special rapporteur. The third quick area on the Human Rights Council I point out to is the entire framework again of the LGBT rights. And again, this is a very instructive example because the Indian government is very conscious of the domestic Indian landscape. So a question was asked at one point in time that, what will the Indian government take the support, for example, support the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. And India's position on that, response to that, was, we can't take such a position as of now because of a case going on in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is seized of the matter. But again, the point is simple. The Supreme Court at no point in time made the case that one cannot take forward the question of LGBT rights. The Supreme Court is looking at a narrow question of decriminalization of LGBT rights. But the point being that the Indian government, even post decriminalization, has not voted to support the mandate of the UN expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, this is a shocking abdication of its constitutional obligation when the court is saying we are in support of LGBTQ rights. The court is interpreting the Constitution to say the Constitution recognizes the right to privacy and dignity of the LGBTQ people are concerned, and that we should take forward these rights. But then the Indian government has abstained on that question. So the point I'm making is, in terms of India's voting as far as the Human Rights Council is concerned, we work to dilute human rights standards, or we remain simply silent on the question of human rights standards, both of which do not fulfill our constitutional obligations, which towards all persons, in terms of respecting the right to privacy, dignity, and equality of all persons, as it were. The final point I want to really make is, if we try and think of a deeper rooting in the constitution of what our values should be. I think we'll have to go back in time, as it were. And interestingly enough, the person who took us back in time is the current mayor elect in New York, Mamdani, Mr. Zoran Mamdani, who actually invoked Nehru's speech, A Tryst with Destiny, where he said, I mean, to quote him, he quoted Nehru saying, a moment comes but rarely in history when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. It is interesting that the next line actually, it goes on to say, it is fitting that at this solemn moment, we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity. So there is a, shall we say, a larger vision which underlies the thinking in terms of the drafting of the Indian Constitution itself. And I'll take you to one more point. When the flag resolution was moved in the Constituent Assembly, this is what again Nehru had to say. He said, this flag that I have the honor to present to you is not a hope and trust, a flag of an empire, a flag of imperialism, a flag of domination of anybody, but a flag of freedom, not only for ourselves, but a symbol of freedom to all people who may see it. So there is really underlying the vision of the Indian Constitution, a more broader understanding of what it means, or what freedom means. Freedom is not just for us, but people around the world. The idea that the freedom we have is freedom for everybody. And that should be the vision to really underlie our foreign policy. The other roots, the constitutional root I can find in terms of which should structure our foreign policy is really the directive principles of state policy under Article 51, which says the state shall endeavor to promote international peace and security, maintain just and honorable relations between nations, and foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in the dealing of organized people with one another. If we just take the last 51C obligation, foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in the dealings of organized people with one another, that's your basis to make the case that genocide convention, we have the obligation to both prevent and punish the crime of genocide. And we should be standing with South Africa in the International Court of Justice to make the case that what Israel is doing is a violation of its obligations under the Genocide Convention, and we should fulfill our obligations under 51C. So there is a question for to get past our historical amnesia, rediscover our constitutional rootings in terms of the way we respond to foreign policy challenges. But interestingly enough, the other thing which I did find actually is you might think that what I'm saying is completely abstract and has no connection to anything the Indian state is thinking or saying, which is true in terms of Mr. Jaishankar's articulations. It is true in terms of the way we speak about our foreign policy. It is true in terms of the fact that we chose not to respond to the fact of Israel bombing Iran. That is a violation of the UN Charter. And as far as our 51A and C obligations are concerned, we should have stood with Iran and said this is a violation of an obligation under the UN Charter. If you don't stand for international law, and then we compromise the collective security of the entire world. And that's a very important way of thinking which we need to cultivate. We need to go beyond Mr. Jaishankar's transactional thinking because the future of the world is at stake. And we have to think more deeply. And I think our thinking more deeply can be rooted or filtered through the lens of the Constitution. The last point I'll make is, as I was saying, that you might think all of this is very abstract and I'm saying this, but the Indian state is not on this line at all. But strangely enough, interestingly enough, what I found is in terms of the going back to the context of this particular discussion, the context of this discussion is India has been elected to serve on the premier human rights body in the world, which is the Human Rights Council from 2026 to 2028. As a part of its election, India put forward certain voluntary pledges as to what it will do once it occupies this particular seat in the Human Rights Council. I want to read out to you what India says. India says, as the world's largest democracy, India represents one-sixth of humanity, embodying a vibrant plurality of cultures, languages, and religions. For millennium, its pluralistic society has upheld the values of coexistence, diversity, and human dignity. India's commitment to human rights is deeply rooted in its constitutional framework, which guarantees the fundamental rights of its citizens and promotes the ideals of justice, liberty, and equality. This candidature for the Human Rights Council is a reflection of India's dedication to advancing the principles of human rights globally, fostering dialogue, and bridging divides to achieve collective progress. Just some of the pledges which India has put forward in terms of what it's going to do in the Human Rights Council. See, India will continue to strengthen national mechanisms and procedures to promote and protect the human rights and vulnerable freedoms of all its citizens. India will continue to cooperate and engage with special procedures, accept requests for visits, and respond to communications. India is committed to implementing the recommendations accepted during the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. India remains committed to ratifying the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. So, what we have to do is ensure that India functions both in tune with its constitution and constitutional values, and in terms of its pledges, which are really in tune with its constitutional values. Just that nobody knows the pledges. Or domestically, we had a discussion on the India's pledges to the before the General Assembly. So we need to bring forth to the Indian state that your work in the Human Rights Council, you have undertaken a mandate. This is what you're saying you're going to do. So we have to ensure we have to ensure that they fulfill their obligations, which they have self declared or self undertaken in the time period from 2026 to 2028. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Arvind. Thank you for taking us through the promises that India has made the time of being elected to the Human Rights Council, and also to, also to take us through, its constitutional obligations to promote, international law, foreign policy, and how it has performed, recently in the prelude to the election to the Human Rights Council. I think these are very important, points. You spoke some very important, I think, points that you made again on how currently India's relationship with, the UN or with, the international law or with the conventions and bodies has been transactional. And it has not been based on a vision or any values. I think this is a very important thing, because this also, apart from, its own responsibility, its own obligation under the Constitution to be, to ensure, to uphold human rights, to uphold international law, it's also reflected in terms of its failure to, to implement, promote, and protect human rights in India. So I think that's also another very important, failure that we are seeing, because some of the commitments that India is not adhering to, or it is breaching, is actually reflecting in human rights violations in our own country and against its own citizens. So I think this is a very important point that you brought. And what you also raised the question that what have we done to perform these obligations, and what should we do, like looking forward, like now that you are re-elected to the Human Rights Council, what should you do now that you have been elected to the Human Rights Council? Some very important questions have been raised, and thank you, Arvind, for setting the tone. I am now going to invite Advocate Henry Tiffan, a litigator in the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court and also in other courts across the country. He's also the executive director of People's Watch, a leading human rights organization that has been, involved in human rights advocacy and has also faced reprisals because of that. He's also National Secretary of the Human Rights Defenders Alert India and of ANI India, and executive committee member of the World Organization Against Torture, and the chair of International Dalit Solidarity Network. You hold many hats, Henry. I'm not going to waste too much time in the introduction, but we all also know you also were the 8th recipient of the Human Rights Award by Amnesty International. We're very honored to have you here. Henry, you are a part of the PUCL family as well. And I request you to, in particular, talk to us about how India India's leading human rights organization, the National Human Rights Commission, has performed. What have we upheld human rights in the true sense? And most importantly, have we been able to translate these international obligations into domestic law? So if you can take us through, the national perspective now on what we are seeing in terms of India's performance, this is the mandate I would give you, and please, Henry, feel free to begin.
Thank you, Lara. I hope I'm audible. Good evening, friends. First of all, let me congratulate PUCL for this initiative. It's a very timely initiative, perhaps a very unique initiative, the first of its kind where PUCL engages with the international human rights mechanisms and what India's role in the same has been or has to be. I know it is a very major decision in PUCL, and I really want to congratulate all of you who are party to this decision. Let me at the outset also, for many others, I think we need to remind ourselves, I belong to the PUCL family. If today I am engaged in what I'm doing, I started it as a law student in 1980s, early 80s, by building the People's Union for Civil Liberties in Madurai city, and then moving on and learning through that process. Getting Justice Tarkunde and Kannabaran beaten in Madurai is perhaps one of the things that I'm remembered for in the 1982. So my grooming has been through PUCL, with PUCL, and because of PUCL. And I want to say that proudly so that many others will also feel the importance of the PUCL in today's context. Today's meeting makes a lot of sense. You have me here. You spoke about reprisals. I am precisely also under reprisals precisely for engaging with the UN system. And I had a criminal case. I'm happy to say I had a criminal case, which is now dropped, but which was related precisely to the engagement with the UN human rights mechanisms. So that is the cost that these mechanisms engagement makes you pay. And for what? For accompanying UN special rapporteurs, for sending communications to UN special rapporteurs. And if that was the crime, we all resolved to continue that crime, because that is our duty, as was so well said by my previous speaker and friend Arvind. So well said. Having said that, I think this is an opportunity for us to understand that everything in human rights is not independent of politics. Everything is connected to politics. So it is connected to politics within, and it is connected to politics outside. It is connected to international politics. And therefore, all the positions that Arvind spoke of, giving examples, and many others which are going to come through the other speakers who are to follow, all these are connected to day-to-day politics. Human rights and politics, global and national, have to be seen together and have to be understood together. Now, I have divided my presentation in three small parts. The first part is what I was told. The chair will definitely agree on the pledges themselves, what the pledges are. I know Arvind touched towards the end on the pledges. I will just go a little deep into what the pledges were. Two, what these institutions, national human rights institutions are, and therefore, what is the third phase is what is the accreditation of our National Human Rights Commission. So these are the three parts that I'm trying to do my presentation through. Now, these pledges are election pledges and commitments. India, because it stands before the General Assembly and says we want to be a member of the Human Rights Council, they pledge what their commitments are going to be, and these are titled as voluntary pledges. So these are their election manifesto, their human rights manifesto in a country where they don't have a parliamentary standing committee on human rights. Our country doesn't have that. And yet, globally, they are going to promise the global community of what their pledges are. And as the coordinator of this entire event, Lara pointed out, they have consistently from 2006 till now been occupying the Human Rights Council position, excepting on 3 years, 2011, 2018, and 2025, which were because of the statutory limitation they have in terms of standing for elections. So they have held the position 6 times, and this is their 7th term. So what is their 7th term pledges that they made to the General Assembly? Very interesting, very interesting pledges that they make. People should not laugh. One is to uphold the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. So you and I know what are the highest standards are there within the country, but this is what they have pledged outside. Second, for the full realization of civil, political, economic, social, cultural rights, including right to development. And you'll have all these cliches there, to cooperate with states, to promote the work of the Human Rights Council. How do you promote the work of the Human Rights Council is what is most important. And that you do through resolutions. And that would be told, I'm sure, by Sajad, who will come a little later in concrete terms, how that takes place. India will also continue to support the protection and promotion of the rights of women, children, persons with disabilities. The litany is there. And support international efforts to combat racism, racial discrimination, etc. Now, one important aspect is India will continue to cooperate and engage with special procedures, accept requests for visits, and respond to communications. Please wait. Please wait. Sajad will give you the entire list of how many visits we have not had for almost 7 years. Not had for 7 years. That has been their actual record, and he will detail on it. India is committed to implementing the 4th cycle recommendations of the UPR. We were all there, part of the UPR, each of us in our respective places, through our respective organizations, platforms, etc. We in India participated so well. We had almost 5,000 different meetings held across the country where small groups, larger groups, all sat and watched the UPR in their own respective areas. What has been implemented? We have the Convention Against Torture will be ratified as a pledge, a lie, a blatant lie for the past 5-6 years. It has never happened. We have had UPR 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them talking about the Convention Against Torture. It has never been ratified. Implementation of the human rights treaties that India has ratified. It has not done so in the recent Human Rights Committee sitting, where they reported after 24 long years, is a clear proof of what their adherence to the treaty bodies and their assurances are. And then they come to the biggest point, which is most important. India will maintain the independence, autonomy, and genuine powers investigation of the NHRC, including the National Commission for Women, the National Commission for Protection of Children, and they go on listing for the first time, perhaps, in their pledges, all the commissions. Who has told them you should list all this? It is you and the me from civil society who have been reminding them. We are a country which has so many institutions, which is not seen in any other part of the world. Genuine participation and effective involvement of civil society. Kuram Parvez is inside, initially arrested for going to attend the Human Rights Council. Involvement of civil society, including human rights defenders, in the protection and promotion of human rights and strengthen protection against reprisals. All these, therefore, are just cliches, and they finish with the SDPs and what their contribution is. This is their voluntary pledges and commitment to what they will be doing in the Human Rights Council. Now that Lara has already said, they have occupied the seat from 2006 till 2025 being the break, and now they will continue occupying 2026 up to 28. Let us look at one aspect which they've asked me to look at, is what their contribution in terms of national human rights institutions are. And national human rights institutions in our country, we don't need to, we are among ourselves, so all of us know that we have over 9 national human rights institutions with complaints handling powers. And in the state level, every state has commissions, which are known as state human rights institutions. And so totally, I calculate roughly about 170 such institutions across India. No other country globally has such institutions, and therefore we have every right to ensure that our institutions are effective. Now, to make them effective, all these national human rights institutions, including India, come under a global initiative known as the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. It is their body, and it is their body which accredits each of them on the Paris principles, ensuring whether they adhere to Paris principles or not, and granting them all the status that they deserve as close as possible to Paris principles adherence. And I want to highlight that such accreditation meetings took place in 2000, of course, 8. I'm not referring to 8 now. 2011, 2016, 2017, 2023, 2024, and 2025. All these years, they had accreditation meetings. They were accredited A grade in 2011 with a question mark, and that question mark was removed thereafter. But anyhow, they had recommendations made in 2011. In 16, it was deferred by a year, saying, we cannot grant you your A grade, you come next year. Deferral in 16. 17, they were granted once again an A grade. In 23, they go back and they were told, go home, you are deferred this year. In 24, they said, go home, you are deferred this year. And in 25, when they came up, they said, that's enough. We are recommending a downgrading of your institution. So here is India with 3 deferrals in between 2016 and now, the 3 deferrals and 1 recommendation for a downgrading, which they have reviewed. They have filed their review application, which is pending, which will come before the same Gandhi Bureau sometime in late November, early December, and they will be again reviewed next year. Friends, why is this important? Because this process of accreditation brings up a few issues which are common to all of us, or known to all of us. One is the involvement of police officers. You and I are talking about it daily. The involvement of police officers in investigation of complaints. Second is the composition and the lack of pluralism in this commission. And this is from 2011 onwards. I'm not talking about presently. Third, the whole selection process is against Paris principles. This has been mentioned in 16 and is also mentioned in 23, repeated in 24. The appointment of the Secretary General himself. Presently, we have the Prime Minister's, from the Prime Minister's office. Bharat Lal is from the Prime Minister's office and been given an extension. This Secretary General's appointment has to be independent. We have people like Arvind. We have people like Kavita. These are people who are also capable of heading this commission's as a Secretary General. That is the position that is being made here. You don't need to have an IAS, IFS officer to be sitting there. Third, cooperation with human rights bodies. How do they cooperate with the PUCL? How do they cooperate with platforms of human rights defenders? And last, how are they actually addressing human rights issues? These are the issues under which they have been evaluated, and it has been pointed out that repeatedly they are not fit to be granted an A grade status at all. Friends, in 2023 they were advised deferral. 24 they were advised deferral. 25 they were told that it was time they were downgraded. Believe me, till the 10th of October 25, we play this mischief. When I get a little tired, I send a tweet to the NHRC. So I asked the NHRC, here is your foundation day. How long will you continuously give us lies to the public? The National Human Rights Commission in 23, 24, 25 on their website said they are A grade status. And 23rd, actually, it was deferred. 24th, it was deferred. And 25, it was recommended downgrading. Immediately the next day, their website had a new announcement saying exactly what I had said now. So this is the state of the NHRC as such. Friends, there is a new ANI report that has come, which is the Asian network of NGOs working with national human rights institutions. And it's very interesting to see how they have rated them in terms of a large exercise. Many of you participated in that exercise. You must have seen that index that I shared to many of you. Many people would have been pained to see the the long questions that were there, but that has resulted. And it is civil society which has been doing this. And on mandate, we were ranked 10th among 11 countries with a rating of 5 points when the maximum point of other countries was 9.75. On themes such as pluralism, promotion, protection, we were ranked 11, last. Indian NHRC ranked last. And in terms of cross-country issues as well as independence, we were also ranked last. It's a shame. It's a shame for the National Human Rights Commission that its civil society has to rate it in these terms. Now, friends, the new chair has come in, and the new chair, unfortunately, had to carry the baggage of the old chair, who was Arun Mishra in 23 and 24, who handed over the baggage right in the middle of the railway station and ran away, bringing one downgrading in 23, another downgrading in 24, and allowed Justice Ramasubramanian to head it with the downgrading ultimately being recommended. We have a number of vacancies that still continue in the NHRC, and it is important to read in the last subcommittee on accreditation report, one small paragraph alone. I thought this body needs to hear. And I want to read it to show to what level people go. The SCA also notes attempts by the Indian national authorities to engage members of the SCA relative to the accreditation process of the NCHR of the NHRC, including the involvement of various foreign missions. The FCA emphasizes that the Gandhi accreditation system is a peer review mechanism which requires NHRIs to maintain their independence. Friends, this is the level that our NHRC, our foreign missions have stooped to go to ensure that some sort of political pressure is being put. We did it in the past. We have not done anything. Now it is on record. The subcommittee on accreditation in its own report has said this. Now, all this has happened, friends, not because of Indian civil society alone. And I want to acknowledge particularly the participation of ISHREL with Pooja Patel, who is one among those many other international human rights organizations which also participated in this process of monitoring and speaking aloud in terms of the National Human Rights Commission of India and its performance. It was regional human rights organizations as well as international human rights organizations. Therefore, there is a cost to pay. And that cost is the cost of the various other reprisals that we have faced here, but we will continue unitedly because we know that this Human Rights Commission belongs to us, and we need to continue to remind the government that this is one of your voluntary pledges that you have made to have a robust, effective National Human Rights Commission in our country. And one of the recommendations to make here is to ensure that within the country, we ask parliamentarians also to join us in this entire drive. Let it not be only civil society, human rights organizations led initiative. Let more and more parliamentarians join the drive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. And I'm not going to summarize. I think you've been very, very clear. We have been elected to the National Human Rights Council, even as our National Human Rights Commission is faltering. As we know, the National Human Rights Commission was enacted because of our international obligations. The Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993, under which the human rights institutions in India were constituted, was a result of our international obligations to promote and protect human rights. And we're seeing these very institutions in a state of disarray, with no plan to change many of these things that Henry spoke about, to ensure its independence, to ensure protection of human rights, which is his mandate. So we are, some really important points have come to us, and the Annie report has also been shared on chat for all of you to go through and also use in our human rights work, in our communications, in our advocacy. So I'd like to immediately call our next speaker, because we are going to take Sajad Hassan from the South Asia Collective, as the final speaker. And before that, I would like to call in who has to leave early, who has to leave at 7:30 India time, and I want him to have space to talk and time to talk. So, but I'd like to call in Pooja first, of course, from ISHR Global to talk to us about what India's scorecard has been. ISHR came up with a scorecard prior to the HRC election. How did India perform on that scorecard? And before that, I would like to introduce Pooja. Pooja Patel has been serving as has been working with the International Service for Human Rights, ISHR, a leading international human rights organization, and she's the Deputy Executive Director, Programs and Advocacy. And in her capacity as an executive director, as Deputy Executive Director, she oversees capacity building, policy communications and campaigns, and also focuses on women's rights and LGBTQI rights. Prior to SHR, she also worked with Asia Forum for Human Rights and Development, the Forum Asia, who's also a member of ANI in Bangkok and Geneva. Welcome, Pooja, to our platform. And Pooja is also a very good friend, and it's great to have you here for the first time with PUCL. Please do tell us more about the ISHR report, the scorecard, and what India's performance has been on the scorecard, and what you feel also in terms of India's what India needs to do now that it has been made an HRC member again.
Thank you so much, Lara. First of all, I'm really humbled to be part of this panel, and thank you so much to PUCL for this invitation. And I really welcome this conversation as well, this dialogue. I hope that it is the first of many more. So as the previous speakers have already mentioned, the membership to the Human Rights Council, it's not just a seat with a vote. It is also a responsibility to uphold the highest human rights standards, both internationally and at home. So as Lara mentioned, I will spend some time just quickly going through or summarizing the scorecard that ISHR prepared with Forum Asia. But also I would like to also take a moment to situate India's upcoming membership within the global context and the multilateral context as well. So in its previous term, by the way, I also wanted to say that when I think about membership terms to the Human Rights Council, I actually think about them as 6-year terms, because the terms are 3 years, renewable once, before they have to sit out for a year. So really, we are talking about membership from 2026 up until 2031. So in India's previous membership term, 2019 to 2024, there were a number of different major domestic human rights challenges that India faced during that time. And so to assess the record of its previous membership term, ISHR and Forum Asia developed scorecards that are based on a set of objective criteria, which is outlined in something that is called the Irish Principles, that many states at the Human Rights Council use to voluntarily evaluate whether situations deserve the Human Rights Council's attention. And our argument has been for a number of years that absolutely, against these objective criteria, the Council needs to provide greater scrutiny on the situation. So let's look very briefly at how India performed against these principles during its previous terms. So firstly, when it comes to UN calls for action, this criterion was met. There were clear UN level calls for action. The Secretary General, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, several UN experts had repeatedly raised concerns about Kashmir, about the Citizenship Amendment Act, Manipur, restrictions on civic freedoms, situation of minorities, etc. Regarding special procedures, and I know that Sajad will go much more deeper into this, but dozens of UN special rapporteurs have urged the Human Rights Council to act, especially when it comes to freedom of assembly, religious discrimination, detentions under national security laws, including of human rights defenders and journalists. When it comes to the National Human Rights Institution, you've already just heard in much more detail about the deferrals on India's status. the status of India's National Human Rights Commission. So whereas maybe officially it retains an A status, concerns have been placed by GANRI, by civil society, on its continued work and functioning, and that it is not in line with the Paris Principles. There's also a criteria around, to what degree has the state acknowledged the human rights challenges that it faces, noting that no state is perfect, that there are human rights concerns in every country in the world, but what is the level of commitment that the state is taking on its own initiative to try to address these challenges. So on this, we found that this criteria has also not been met. India has rarely admitted to systemic human rights problems. Instead, it often describes UN criticism as biased or politically motivated. Responses on specific HRD cases is often to cite rather the responsibilities and obligations that citizens have to uphold the law. When it comes to engagement with the Human Rights Council and special procedures, while India does participate in the debates, it has delayed or denied country visits by special rapporteurs, rejected many important recommendations as well. And then when it comes to the access for media, NGOs, and defenders, the civic space has shrunk. Journalists face criminal charges, NGOs face funding blocks, etc. And so we consider that criterion also has not been met. So overall, in summary, India shows procedural cooperation but lacks substantive openness. It engages formally but not in spirit. Accountability and transparency are often absent. When it comes to India's role and performance more generally at the Human Rights Council, in terms of how does it show up in that space, at the Council, India has positioned itself as a defender of sovereignty and dialogue rather than as a promoter of human rights accountability. It sees itself very much as a counter geopolitical balance to the West. However, at the same time, because India values maintaining its own autonomy and flexibility, the concept of alliance in the strict sense is also a bit limited. It doesn't have kind of a strict alliance, but we do see patterns of convergence with other states, especially those who emphasize sovereignty, non-interference, global South solidarity, and also those who align on restrictions to civic space. It often abstains or votes cautiously on country-specific resolutions, arguing that human rights should be addressed through cooperation and not confrontation. And just as Arvind had mentioned, we also find that it takes a much more pragmatic line rather than principled. Arvind described it as transactional. It looks kind of at the equation of its human rights votes as against its most important foreign policy interests, which are trade and security. In terms of what other states have said about the situation in India, other states of the member and observer states of the Human Rights Council, we found that in recent years, relatively few states at the Council have been willing to subject India's human rights record to sustained and meaningful scrutiny, despite major domestic concerns such as the Citizenship Amendment Act, prolonged restrictions, detentions in Jammu and Kashmir, the violence in Manipur, among other issues. A significant factor shaping this hesitancy is probably the primacy that many states are placing on maintaining strong bilateral and strategic relations with India, especially in areas of trade, security, and regional influence. At the same time, India has consistently responded forcefully and negatively to external criticism, framing scrutiny as politically motivated or as an infringement on sovereignty. So this combination of diplomatic caution by other states and India's defensiveness has, I think, limited robust multilateral accountability. And so it has allowed significant human rights concerns to remain insufficiently addressed on the international stage. Just want to turn now to India's upcoming term because I want to situate the next 6 years within the geopolitical and funding context in which we currently are. So the upcoming term comes at a particular moment for the UN system and for human rights multilateralism in general. I'm sure you all know that the UN system is facing deep budgetary strain. So we're talking of spending cuts of about 20% for 2026 and beyond. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights warns of a shortfall of around 60 million US dollars. So what does this mean? It means that the capacity of the Human Rights Council, of treaty bodies, of special procedures to respond robustly is under pressure and will be under pressure in the foreseeable future. This will impact the political will and the financial means of what it is able to do. I also just wanted to situate as well India's position within the UN system beyond the Human Rights Council as well. So India is also very active in UN budgetary and administrative organs. For instance, it is serving right now as a member of the ACABQ, which is the Advisory Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Questions. It is, I guess, an oversight body which reviews decisions around UN budget and administrative issues. It also has a seat in the Fifth Committee of the UN, the Fifth Committee of the General Assembly, which handles the main it's the Budget and Administrative Committee, which handles UN's regular budget, peacekeeping, finance, and decisions regarding spending. So what that means is that India is not just an actor within the UN system, but it is very much embedded in the financial and governance architecture of the UN. And so, as it is about to assume the Human Rights Council membership again, its stance on human rights multilateralism will be closely watched, both in terms of substantive content, as well as around funding and institutional support to the system as a whole. And so in terms of relevance for its upcoming term, I think we kind of see three main areas. So one of them being around funding and political leverage. So this ongoing funding freeze at the UN makes India's financial and political commitment to the Human Rights Council and other human rights mechanisms very consequential. So stakeholders will now be looking also at India with an additional lens of how it is going to contribute to a healthy multilateral system. Then I think that we have a number of learnings from the previous membership term that we also have to account for. We categorize these sometimes as risks and challenges. India's record suggests a lack of principled engagement, including on restricting NGO participation at the UN through obstructing accreditation processes, for example, as well as a pattern of reprisals against human rights defenders who want to engage with the system. And so these lessons from the previous term indicate that India may react defensively towards human rights defenders, UN staff, independent experts who highlight domestic concerns. And we have to anticipate this and navigate this as well. But finally, that we also see a number of opportunities for tactical leverage, that despite these concerns, India's Human Rights Council membership may offer some strategic openings. Through resolutions, through special rapporteur reports, through statements and other thematic initiatives, to consider them as opportunities to create some kind of a space domestically to advance, I think, the possibilities to hook on to these things as advocacy opportunities. And so I have, I guess, 4 main recommendations going forward. First of all, my first one is to kind of strengthen, I suppose, the exchange, the dialogue, and the work, I suppose, that is being done between international NGOs and groups inside of the country as well, and maybe perhaps even to kind of systematize some of this work through maybe a joint civil society strategy group that monitors India's engagement at the Human Rights Council and identifies opportunistic moments and can coordinate advocacy as well. Secondly, to map opportunities where UN outcomes can be translated into domestic leverage for policy or public engagement. So yes, there is absolutely an implementation gap, but I think what we have to maybe do is an assessment of, what outcomes that have come out of the UN can actually be taken forward in tactical ways. Thirdly, to develop a rapid response mechanism to address emergency and urgent situations, as well as attempts to obstruct NGO participation or retaliatory actions against human rights defenders engaging with the UN. And finally, to prioritize engagement that both pressures India to adhere to its international obligations and identifies achievable entry points for positive outcomes in domestic human rights practices. So, for example, we could consider a set of very minimum benchmarks that India must achieve in the next 6 years. So in closing, India's return to the Council in 2026 is a test of credibility. If India wants to lead globally, it must also listen, reform, respect rights at home. And it is up to us as a human rights community to ensure that this term is remembered not just for diplomacy, but also for real human rights change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooja. I think some very important recommendations, that you have made, and also thank you for presenting the scorecard. And it was important to know how and recollect how India has failed at so many levels in terms of its commitments, but most importantly, how we have lost the independence of bodies, human rights institutions, how we have failed to protect human rights which are ingrained in the Indian Constitution. I think these are really important aspects that we also need to remember, because this is going to be an important in terms of our advocacy in India's next term. So I think these are some really important aspects even now after India's election. I don't want to waste any time because Sajad doesn't have any. And I want to call the next speaker. We have Sajad Hassan from the South Asia Justice Collective. He's a human rights researcher and trainer, formerly of the Indian Administrative Service. He convenes the South Asia Collective of human rights activists and researchers from across the region, advocating for human and minority rights across South Asia. We are very pleased to have you here, Sajad, and especially to hear your insights. First, of course, to present the South Asia Justice Collective report, which details how India failed to cooperate with the UN human rights mechanism, something that Henry also touched upon, Pooja also reported through the scorecard, but also to present the opportunities that lie ahead for India to set the expectations for India's next term in the Human Rights Council. Very strategically, we have placed you as our final speaker because some of these points are going to be very important in terms of our advocacy now that India is a member of the Human Rights Council. So the floor is yours, Sajad. And immediately after you are done, we'll also be opening up to questions. I request all those who have questions to Sajad to put them on the chat room first. And then, of course, we can also take questions for the other speakers. But Sajad will have to leave. So I request those questions to come in first. Thank you. Sajad, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Lara. Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much. And really thank you to PUCL for organizing this really important conversation. And of course, thanks to my fellow panelists, Arvind, Henry, and Pooja, for the great interventions. I have a little slide that I wanted to use while I'm speaking, so I'll try to share it. And
please do.
Yeah, right. Let me see if, and hopefully you can see it.
We can. You can put it in the slideshow mode.
Right. Yeah, let me do that. Where's it gone? Somewhere here. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. So, well, actually, before I begin, just wanted to say, having just heard Pooja come in with her very concrete recommendations, I think that is the conversation we need to have and spend most time on. I mean, the rest is all what the situation is right now or what has been the case in the past. But I think I'm really glad that this conversation is happening, and what I'm hoping is that we can have some good discussions on the way forward. So really looking forward to that. But let me get started quickly with whatever I have. And what I was going to do was to try to, based on everything that the other speakers have said and have already shared, so the ground is already covered quite a bit, but try to give everyone a sense of India's engagement with what you might call the UN human rights mechanism, a little snapshot really, and just to try to sort of provide little evidence, if you can call it that, of the poor engagement. The point has been made in the past by other speakers, but just to share some further thoughts on those. Now, to start with, when we say UN human rights mechanism, primarily, what is it? It's there'll be different elements, but in terms of entities, you would have the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is in a sense the bureaucracy, the foundation, the platform that enables all of UN's work on the human rights side. You have the Human Rights Council, which is the political entity made up of members, to which India has just been re-elected, and there are several more. I think the total number, Pooja probably will know better, about 47 members in the HRC. And then finally, the third leg, the third element is basically expert bodies. So you have the treaty bodies, which essentially are entities that own the different conventions and their implementation, they monitor implementation, conduct reviews, etc. And the special procedures, which are independent experts called UN experts who monitor and engage on different issues. So with that sort of what should be background, let me quickly start with the first element, which is the High Commissioner's Office, and basically talking to India's engagement. So if you can see this slide, I mean, this is from 2023 when the current High Commissioner took office, and one of the key sort of agenda for him at that time.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't think the slide's really moving.
Oh, are they not?
No. Aishwarya, is it? No, it's not. It's not. Maybe, yeah, now it is. Thank you.
Okay, so I put it back to non-slideshow. So maybe if it's still visible, if it's working, let's keep it like this. Is that okay?
It is visible. It's Volkatuk's
slide. Perfect. Right. So I'm just saying that so basically to say that something like 95 countries have UN human rights presence. That is, they have their office, they have somebody doing the work of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is collecting information, meeting with civil society, engaging with authorities, etc. India does not have a human rights presence, UN human rights presence in the country. Well, the key agenda for the current High Commissioner when he took office back in 22, was it, or 2023, was to try to establish an office in India along with China. They have failed. There's a lot of resistance. India still does not allow the High Commissioner's office to have a presence there, which means, therefore, that then the UN system, everything, all of these different elements are only reliant on civil society group, individuals, as well as media to get information about what is happening on the human rights front in the country. Now, for a country which is the most populous country in the world, the largest democracy in the world, not to have a human rights office and yet to claim it's constructively engaging with UN and human rights, etc., is a big red flag. I will leave it at that. Just to say that despite efforts, there's still no agreement on opening a UN office in India. So as a result, on occasions when the High Commissioner raises concerns about what's happening in India, and several of these concerns have already been referred by previous speakers. What is happening is also, and not as a result, but really parallelly, is what is happening is also that there's pushback. So, for instance, in March 2025. They have at the Human Rights Council. It starts with a global overview by the High Commissioner, and the High Commissioner provides an overview of the human rights situation. In that overview, covering all the different countries, he also referenced the situation in India, and particularly warnings against targeting journalists and civil society members amid a context of human rights abuses, and also mentioned the violence and abuses in Manipur and Kashmir. And what resulted was what you see reported in this slide, which is India hitting back, basically, and this has been the consistent sort of pattern we've seen for several years now, that when UN actors, including the High Commissioner, raise these concerns, there's a rejection of these concerns, mostly framing them as misinformed, biased, inconsistent with reality, etc., etc. There's no engagement either with facts or with plans to improve things, or even to have an honest dialogue. So that's where we are at in terms of just the first element of the mechanism, and we can talk more about this. Moving on, I'd like to move to the second element I mentioned, which is the within the Human Rights Council, one of the instruments that the members have is also what is called the UPR review, Universal Periodic Review, which is a peer-reviewed sort of review of countries' human rights record. Happens every year. Every 5 years. The last one, which was the fourth cycle, happened in 2022, late 2022. As you can see, this is a report by Human Rights Watch after the conclusion of the review. Now, in that review, 130 member states made some 339 recommendations. This was the review of India. 21 countries urged India to improve its protection of freedom of religion and rights of religious minorities. 20 countries said that India should improve protection of freedom of expression and assembly and create an enabling environment for civil society groups, human rights defenders, and media to do their work. 19 countries said that India should ratify the Convention Against Torture, the Refugee Convention, Rome Statute, also withdraw Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, among others. There were also recommendations on anti-Dalit discrimination, violence, anti-Adivasi discrimination, violence, anti-women discrimination, etc. Now, the response again from the Indian side, from the Indian delegation, was pretty much par for the course, which is that firstly, actually, the more serious concerns, civil political rights, etc., particularly, India only noted those recommendations. So the way it works with the UPR is that the country being reviewed accepts recommendations, which then means that it is obliged to implement those and show results in the next review, or where it is challenging those recommendations or only notes. Now, most of the critical recommendations, India only noted, it did not accept. And therefore, even the possibility of application, of implementation of those recommendations were sort of stymied from the beginning. So that was the stance when it comes to the specifics on recommendations. But then in terms of the framing and the way India presented itself, the government said UPR is an important mechanism that India is fully supports. In the world's largest democracy, India is committed to the highest standards of human rights. So on the one hand, there is the talk of high standards of human rights, etc. But in reality, we see that the response was poor. Now, the next UPR review will happen in 2027, We already know, all of us know the situation on the ground very well. We know that the situation is only getting worse. Right, with that, let me move on to the next element of the mechanism, which is these expert bodies that I was talking about. I'll take the example of two. The Human Rights Committee, which is the entity that owns the ICCPR, the Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Again, these treaty bodies are required to monitor implementation of those conventions by individual countries through reviews, periodic reviews that they conduct, but also engage, raise concerns, etc. Now, these reviews are meant to happen quite periodically, quite frequently, every 5 years, a bit more. Now, the last review of India happened in 2024, November. And this was happening after 27 years, after a gap of 27 years. And that is because in the way these things work, countries have to put themselves forward for these reviews. They have to provide reports, etc., etc., and only then the Human Rights Committee or any treaty body is able to organize these reviews. But because of delays from the side of government of India, this review happened after a long gap of 27 years, and this is probably the most important convention on Civil and Political Rights. So you can imagine how poor our engagement has been just to put ourselves forward for review. Now, in the review itself, committee members raised a range of serious concerns about more recent abuses. I mean, this review was happening after 27 years, so it was covering pretty much 3 decades. But a lot of these concerns were about more recent abuses, violations, but also structural shortcomings, structural weaknesses. But also the committee mentioned that many responses remain, many concerns that the committee had raised prior to the physical review remained unanswered. There were also lots of inaccurate responses. And many of the recommendations for the last review done in 1997 remained relevant, and therefore overall the performance, if you like, was quite poor. Now, going forward, a midterm report is expected on the recommendations made at the 2024 review, and which will be expected in 2027. So that's a moment for civil society, etc., to also engage on those questions, just to take the monitoring task seriously forward. I will move on. Another example, and in the interest of time, let me skip that. But this was really about CERD, which is the other treaty body on the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Again, it's been overdue for 13 years. There have been several concerns raised by CERD just in the last 2, 3, 4 years under their pretty serious mechanism called early warning and urgent action procedure, which only is triggered when there is an urgency involved. This involves displacement of tribal people due to either mega projects or conservation projects, but also concerns in Assam with Bengali-speaking Muslims, concerns around Rohingya refugees, concerns of other tribal groups, etc., etc. But the review has not happened. We do not know when that's going to happen. Other treaty body reviews again remain delayed. CEDAW, CRC last happened in 2014. Let me move on quickly to the other expert entity, which is the special procedures. These are UN experts that either make visits to the country to meet with civil society, meet with authorities, get a sense from the ground of the situation, but also have other means of collecting information and then writing and then sharing concerns, sharing allegations about individual cases of human rights violations, or on patterns of abuses, discrimination, also questions of policy, laws, etc., which are problematic, which might be conflicting with international law. Now, just the record on that is that since 2011, So India has what it calls standing invitation to these UN special procedures that it put out in 2011. Since 2017, there's not been a single visit allowed of any special rapporteur into the country. I think in Kashmir's case, it goes even back earlier, since probably 2014, 2015. But certainly in the last 7, 8 years, not a single special rapporteur has been allowed in, which is quite serious. There are about 15 requests. Despite this standing invitation, special rapporteurs have also made several requests. 15 of them are still standing without any decision. On the communication side, these are letters sent out, and there's a response expected and some engagement. And this thing that is I have there on the slide is a public statement that these special rapporteurs put out back in March 2024, just talking about the poor engagement to special procedures, and mentioning that since 2019, special procedures have issued some 100 communications on India, range of issues, some specific to HRDs, but lots of other abuses, patterns, etc., as I mentioned. Only 23 have received any response. And if you look at each one of those responses, these are really pro forma responses, saying very little in terms of content, in terms of responding to the specific allegations raised. And when these communications are made, they're quite specific in terms of names, specific abuses, what happened, and also in terms of what special procedures are requesting or demanding back from the state. The responses have been, firstly, very little response, especially in the most critical issues. But even where the responses are there, it's very superficial, no specifics, etc. Right. I see that we are going well over time, but just let me try to conclude with another slide, and which is really good, looking at I mean, so all of this poor engagement that is clearly evident is accelerated more recently, but I think there's also a broader historical pattern to our poor engagement, and probably this slide, which is really about India's ratification of major international human rights instrument, will show that India is a party to 6 of the 9 major international human rights instruments, but has not ratified some of the critical ones, like the Torture Convention, the Convention on Migrants, Protection of Rights of Migrants, Convention against enforced disappearances, etc., etc. The fact that these are not ratified means that there's no binding legal obligation in India on these conventions. But even where the conventions have been ratified, such as ICCPR, racial discrimination, others, India has not ratified optional protocols of those treaties. And this means that any individual complaints or inquiry and interstate communications do not apply. India has also made several reservations and declarations when acceding to, say, for instance, the ICCPR, but also the Genocide Convention. India is probably one of the only 13 countries to have made a reservation prohibiting prosecution without the consent of the national government within the Genocide Convention, and similar reservations have been made with the ICCPR. Of course, not formally committed to abolishing the death penalty, etc. Again, India has refused to be a state party to the Rome Statute, which means the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is no go, or to the convention, Refugee Convention, the Statelessness Convention, etc. So this is quite. I mean, the lack of just acceding to these conventions at this level, in the sense that there's a widespread poor sort of engagement, poor acceptance of these norms, and ultimately these international conventions are international norms. There are also lay obligations, etc. The fact that there's such a shallow sort of engagement with them says a lot. In fact, if you look at one of our reports for the South Asia Collective, we did a report across the region, and India was probably among the poorest performers, even in the South Asia region, let alone the rest of the world, just on ratification with international conventions and treaties, etc. So that says a lot. I want to conclude by backing up a little to 2009 to the slide which you see on the visit of the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillai. All of us have heard of her, know her, the notable South Asian jurist. This was probably the last official visit by any means by a High Commissioner to India. And I just wanted to quote from the statement she made when she visited India and was visiting the NHRC, about which we heard a great deal from Henry. And what she's saying is, I encourage India to speak out on its own as well as in concert with others whenever the human rights agenda that it cherishes and seeks to pursue domestically becomes of concern elsewhere. She also says, she also urged India to continue to support freedoms and rights wherever they are at stake, and particularly regarding the alarming situation in its own region, such as those in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, etc. Now, this was said in 2009, and that was the high standard that India was held to at global stage and in terms of international human rights that Navi Pillai was referring to. And it's remarkable that everything that we've heard the panel today speak to is a negation of that high hope from India. And that is our greatest failing from what we could have been as among the founding members of the UN system, and specifically the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which establishes the system of human and civil rights as we know it today, and India's central role in enshrining an expansive rights framework, and people like Hansa Mehta, Lakshmi Menon, M.R. Vasani, who played key roles in drafting the UDHR that applied to all people everywhere unconditionally. And it is that legacy and that role that we must claw back, not just improving our own human rights record, but also leading the push globally for a just and humane world in these difficult times all around. And I think the question really is, what can we all do to change the situation from where we are to where we should be going and where we could have been? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sajad. Very, very true. I mean, we, even if we go now, to most of the world, we are reminded, or we are always told, that India is like a leader of human rights in Asia. And we all know what the reality is. And thanks for presenting the reality. I think the hangover of India, being the largest democracy, hangover of India being a leader in human rights law, in human rights, standards that were created, starting from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to also, it's, in terms of how it translated many of these standards into domestic legislations through its own statutes. Now that we see in the last, more than a decade, the dismantling of many of those protective legislations, the dismantling of the Constitution, I think the world is catching up to what India is failing to do. And like you said, we have to look forward. Many recommendations came in from Pooja. You also, during your presentation, indicated as to, where the changes are required. And there are questions that are coming in, and Sajad, I know you have to go, but since you've also presented on the ways in which India has failed, and there's a question that has come in that if India does not work on the kind of recommendations that are coming in consistently for a long tenure, what are the repercussions on India? What is the accountability? Is there any other step other than downgrading of the NHRIs? Even if we speak about NHRI's poor performance, this has come from Krishnakant, an climate and environmental activist, and human rights activist from Gujarat. Also with a comment that, India has been consistently, in India, we are seeing that human rights matters are not getting reported. They are deliberately underreported. So this is also, a very important concern. So what is the accountability? Sajad, if you can come in first. Then I'll also take, Henry's inputs on this, but Sajad, if you can come.
Thank you very much for those questions. Yeah, I mean that's a big question. What if? So I mean, the way the international system works, every state is a sovereign entity. You can't be forced into doing things, and therefore all the various obligations, the conventions, etc. You accede to those, and that's how it triggers obligations. But if you if you do not want to, the world cannot pressure you. But then what happens is that then if you also want to claim your place, which in India's case is the rightful place, the largest country, established democracy, etc. That's a huge conflict between what the claim is and what the practice is. And ultimately, it is in that disjuncture that probably lies the way forward for civil society. And I think it also links to the second point about poor reporting, that ultimately the answer lies with all of us to better monitor, record, raise concerns, but also show the mirror in terms of the gap that we're already seeing, as this conversation is clearly pointing to, the gap between claim and practice. And ultimately, that is the answer. There is no other answer. I mean, of course, besides changes on the ground, etc. But that's what I would say. I mean, and ultimately, it is there. It is with civil society, and that's why many of the recommendations that Pooja was referring to make so much sense. And I think it is in those directions that we should be heading. For instance, this whole thing about better sort of coordination between civil society groups, between human rights defenders, but also people who are documenting abuses, documenting discriminations, and how those things can be better presented, conversations held on that, and there's better monitoring. And this is how every other situation in similar contexts have managed to push the case for improved sort of practices on the ground, improved human rights on the ground. I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajad. If there are any others who want to ask any questions specifically to Sajad, then there are two options. Either put it on the chat, or I can, unmute you and you can raise your hand. So, I'd also, Sajad, if it's fine with you, and we can take a comment from Henry as well. Henry, if, what about the downgrading? Is downgrading going to be the only thing? And do tell us, like, what are the other ways in which we can push to, making the national human rights institutions accountable, and also reporting their underperformance. Henry, if you can unmute.
You can unmute now, Henry.
Yeah, sorry. I've been moving, and therefore the matter of difficulties. Yeah. Now about the downgrading. I mean, this is an exercise where the Global Alliance on National Human Rights Institutions, which through its subcommittee on accreditation, engages in the process of accreditation of national human rights institutions. So this entire engagement is an engagement where people from civil society across the respective countries participate in providing a shadow report on the performance of their national human rights institution in their country. And here we are talking about NHRC. The process of participating in this reporting itself is most important than whether we are upgrading them or downgrading them. It is this pressure that we are able to put as civil society on the NHRC that is important. The downgrading is not what is important, or getting a deferral is not what is important. But the fact that they are being monitored and they feel they are being monitored, and civil society is highlighting every one of their lapses, is what is making it difficult for them to manage this. And I think that process has to continue. Now, what if they get downgraded? What if they get downgraded is that the NHRC chairpersons will not be able to thereafter go and continue being part of the bureau. They will not be able to participate in the meetings of the UN, etc., etc. Do these family trips that they are all engaging in very, very frequently, etc. So really, for me personally, it is not the question of whether they got downgraded or not downgraded, or they've been recommended for downgrading, but the fact that civil society is asserting itself on a continuous basis. Just imagine we are telling Justice Ramasubramaniam, sir, I am from Tamil Nadu. We had 20 Tamils killed in the year on 7th of April 2015. The NHRC gave us an order by end of May 2015. On 2nd of June, the Andhra High Court gave a stay order on the directions of the NHRC. The stay continues till today. Justice Ramasubramaniam, Justice Arun Mishra, Justice Dattu, were you all so inefficient not being able to have a proper advocate appointed to ensure that the stay against your order was withdrawn? It is 10 years now. You're going story after story after story after story, raising these issues before the National Human Rights Commission. And that is what has contributed to this report. Can you believe that even today they have 2 vacancies continuing? So this pressure of civil society is what is most important. Putting it not only with National Human Rights Commission, I think we need to move on to other national human rights institutions also within the country. It is civil society engagement for me which is most important, rather than what happens at the international arena. International arena is a playground for us, but the issues are domestic for us. And the domestic issues are the issues that we need to continue to highlight. And the engagement of international human rights organizations on Indian issues, this gives a terrain for organizations like ISHR, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the World Organization Against Torture, and many others to come in. That is what is important.
Thank you, Henry. You're so right. I mean, and we've seen the role NHRC had played in the past. Whether it is the NHRC guidelines on extrajudicial killings, on custodial deaths, on custodial rapes. I mean, all of these were very important, or NHRC interventions in the Gujarat genocide. So many times NHRC had played that role of being that, the intervener, the watchdog, the body that it was supposed to be. Even if it was not perfect, it had intervened in very, very vital cases of human rights violations. The way in which we've seen NHRC go, from being that institution to what it is today, has cost us at so many levels, especially when there have been so many human rights violations taking place, many of which we've spoken about. And whether it is, CAA or abrogation of Article 370, or whether it was, in terms of the SIR that is going on right now, whether it was the attack on protesters during the farmers' protest, the reprisals on HRDs, the political prisoners cases that we have seen, NHRC could have played a very vital role all of these times. But instead, we've also seen the kind of negative role it has played when, even after the Tuticorin police firing, we saw the kind of role NHRC, played or failed to play in many of these cases. So this has hurt us, as citizens, very, very profoundly. It has been a very big setback. And being able to report it, being able to try to hold it accountable even is a really important, initiative that civil society took. And I think that we need to continue doing. And the reflections that we get from the international organizations, the interventions that we get from the international organizations, ISHR and others are really important to hold our institutions accountable. So thank you, Henry, for coming in on that. There are other questions that have come in, and before that, if there is anyone who would like to unmute to ask any question to Sajad in specific, then please raise your hand or please unmute or ask to unmute. We'll be able to unmute you, because I understand Sajad has to leave. I have taken up a lot of your time, Sajad. Thank you for giving us this time. But if there aren't, then thank you so much, Sajad. We'd like to first, first let you take your leave before we continue. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sajad. And we
Thanks
are
for
hoping
having
to
me.
have more conversations. So we look forward to having you again with us.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Yeah.
So, Lara, I had a question.
Yeah, just before that, Kavita, there's a question that has also come in from another, participant, which I would like to, address to
Sure.
Pooja. Yeah. Pooja, a question has come in, also because, see, we also need to know how this will apply in the domestic context. Many of the participants today are, leading activists in their region. We have Prasad Chako, who has been working on Dalit rights, forest rights, also, on indigenous people's rights for a long time, and is also National Secretary of PUCL, and has raised an important question. We are seeing this whole debate going on right now on vote chori. I don't know if you know about it, but there is this whole thing on free and fair elections that is going on. It's not a recent subject. These conversations have been going on for the last couple of years. Questions have been raised on both assembly elections and general elections, the kind of foul play, the kind of, EVM, related, EVM related concerns that have come up. And also now on, the voter lists, because the SIR process, the special intensive review that's going on currently, which is which happened in Bihar, which is going on in another 12 states right now, is that whole process and the way in which it is being conducted, the timing of of it being conducted, the kind of speeches that were made around the introduction of the SIR process, targeting certain communities, have all been of a major concern to civil society as well as to the citizens. Now, this has a big impact on the election process, on the voters list, on who's going to vote, who is not going to vote. Voting being one of the biggest rights, citizenship rights in a democracy. So, this question that has come in is on the free and fair elections. How are they enshrined in the UN conventions? How is exclusion of large numbers of people, which is going to be an outcome of the SIR happening in all of these states, and their right of franchise, especially of the marginalized and minorities? What is going to, what is the response to this in the UN system? Are there conventions regarding this? What can be the advocacy that people can do around this? If you can, respond to some of this, or, to the extent you can, yeah.
Okay, I'll try my best. It's a huge question. So I think the first thing I want to echo what Henry said towards the end of his intervention just now, which is that ultimately, really, the UN system are maybe two things. First of all, it's a mirror, it's a reflection of what is happening domestically. And secondly, it's a place where there can be some leverage. It's a place where there are some tools where maybe you can hook onto something, you can find some kind of an opening, but ultimately the change is happening domestically, and it needs to be thought of as a national process all the time. With, okay, what are the opportunities that exist at the UN? And I think that this case is a very interesting one, because first of all, it completely pokes a hole at the whole world's largest democracy narrative, okay? And I think there is something around that narrative that we really have to really be poking a hole on at the UN level. And I think that secondly, what it requires us to do, and this I think also responds a little bit to the question that Sajad got around when there is persistent non-compliance, what do we do? There is no formal mechanism at the UN that, let's say, punishes a state for persistent non-compliance. But what there is are all of the various different available tools, whether it is UN conventions, whether it is independent experts at the special procedures, whether it is the High Commissioner's office, whether it is the intergovernmental system itself and talking to different states, where I think we have to kind of take everything that we have learned and what we know works and doesn't work, and kind of think a little bit very tactically and very strategically about what needs to be done in this particular case. And so, I mean, it links a bit to this recommendation that I had around a strategy group that connects the international groups with the national groups, so that exactly in cases like this, where we can kind of come together and say, okay, what are the hooks that are available internationally that we can use in our advocacy that is happening at the national level? What do we hook on to? Which mandate has been working on this and is really interested? And I guess our role as ISHR, also other organizations, not just us in Geneva, is maybe to provide a little bit of the, let's say, the technical assistance or the connections or, the contacts and the networks. But ultimately, I think that the assessment has to be about what is the change that needs to happen on the ground, and what are the kind of right types of engagement that need to happen at the UN that maybe opens up some space for that.
Thank you, Pooja. I think one of the hooks that we have is also that international organizations such as yours are, monitoring what is happening in India. And I think it's going to be important to monitor what is happening during the special intensive review process and this whole, the whole voter list, process. I think that's going to be a really important, kind of a collaboration, or at least, that can take those conversations in the international spaces. I think that's a very important thing. And like you said, I think we have to look at the hooks, but the work is happening over here on the ground, and how robust we make the national campaign is also really kind of important. And one more, I think, a thing that we have is that there are several conventions that India has signed, like the ICCPR, which require India to conduct fair and free elections. And if these conventions are being violated, there are processes that are within the ICCPR which we can also start looking at reporting to, or at least tapping, because there has to be some sense of accountability. That, I mean, even if India decides to flout recommendations, but at least we need to put this on record in many ways before the international bodies. So I think these are some things that what you said also, that we will have to do in the in this process. I'd like to invite Kavita Srivastav, who is the president of People's Union for Civil Liberties. And Kavita, you were raising a question, and if you can also reflect on on what the speakers have spoken about in terms of what the civil society in India should be doing in terms of its engagement with the UN. Henry had raised an important point and reminded that PUCL is one organization that has not been working at an international level, and I think and consciously, because we have been working very robustly in the domestic advocacy space, also litigating, as well as providing playing that supportive role in terms of policy as well as community work. So I think if you can also talk about how civil society needs to broaden its view, because one place I feel that this becomes important is our own domestic laws are becoming hollow. I mean, our constitution is being hollowed out. And we have to look beyond now the constitutional framework as well to the commitments India has made outside of here. So, Kavita, if you can come in and also pose a question.
So my initial response is this, that however horribly we behave internationally. We violate everything that we have signed. We can brazenly refuse 19 times special rapporteurs. You know, nothing matters to the present India government, the way it sort of behaves. Nothing matters. And there is no public opinion regarding this at a larger level. So while we are deliberating, and it's a very important question to deliberate, but till it doesn't become a larger public question, it really doesn't matter to the Indian government. To this government, there's only one thing this matters. What matters is winning of elections. I mean, they were in the Human Rights Council, India, sorry. Yeah, because I think I want to keep my distance from this government. They were in the Human Rights Council till 24, the worst time, 22 to 24. They behaved as badly. You know, what did they do when you get elected unopposed? So thrilled, congratulating ourselves that we are so committed towards human rights. So nothing really bothers them. While the hard work that each organization represented here, whether it was Henry or Pooja or Sajad, it internationally, as far as these instruments are concerned, since they're not actually in that sense affects their performance in India, because nobody's even bothered about what NHRC is doing. People's alienation from the NHRC has been there now for I mean, definitely 15 years. We started giving up. I mean, the last we used to do regular public hearings as PUCL Rajasthan, along with other organizations. We gave up, I think, 12 years ago, even doing public hearings against the NHRC. Others used to bring together all our reports. So NHRC has ceased to matter. I mean, people like us who continuously are documenting violations. I mean, we just documented monthly violations of what happens to Christian minorities from the day the Rajasthan anti-conversion law was introduced in the assembly. 3rd of September, monthly. We did it for the month of September. We did it for the month of October. And nothing matters. Really nothing matters. We sent it everywhere, including NHRC as part of process. Nothing. No response. So I just feel, while it's very important for us as human rights activists to be understanding some of this, I think the second question of Lara, how do we respond? While, we have excellent work being done by some of you, so we don't have to, really participate in those processes, because you're doing it so well, whether it is the UPR or whatever, you all do such great documentation. We can assist you at a very sort of, footnotish level, because you'll do it so well. But I really think we've got to collectively think how to make it an issue of the people in India. We've got to make NHRC first the issue. If we make NHRC the issue, I mean, I'm in a state where we have 12 commissions, 12, right up till the Safai Karamchari. At the moment, we have like only 2 commissions with members. It doesn't matter to them. We've written, we also now planning, we've collected enough to go to the High Court that, yeah, something they should bring. We know they're not going to do anything in our favor, but still, other than State Human Rights Commission and one more, there's nothing. So how can we actually, the first question is, how can we actually make it important for the people of India that these institutions are supposed to be monitoring, vigilant, and being vigilant on the action of the government, till those kinds of actions, till we don't do it like a movement, like we used to do in earlier, till we don't do it like a movement and actually expose them much more, build some sort of consensus, I really feel this will remain a discussion, and a very, very important discussion, but it remains a discussion between just the human rights circuit. Mainstream media, of course, will not pick it up. Once in a while, the others are going to pick it up. They do. I mean, we've seen the work of Henry regularly come. We've seen Amnesty's, comments on what India is, regularly. Yes, it comes, but I don't think it's enough. So, if it doesn't connect to the larger collapse of the system, the NHRC were the first to go. Due diligence completely collapsed. No way of which any action, I mean, till it doesn't come in that framework, that the justice will come only if we actually come together to activate all this. I don't think it'll really matter. I mean, I'm just being sorry. I don't know. Lara, you can interpret what I'm being.
No, I think Kavita, you've raised an important point, and I want Henry to respond on this. What Kavita has said is, really important, Henry, saying that at the end of the day, unless NHRC or the collapse of NHRC doesn't become an issue of the people, of civil society in India, not just, and unless we again start talking about what we have lost because we have lost the NHRC, all of us organizations take it to the people, talk about how they have lost a forum. Because at the end of the day, any citizen of the country can go to the NHRC, to report state violations, but they have lost that forum. So unless, we talk about that, I mean, forget the fact that there are no human rights courts anywhere. Again, that is another very big issue. So unless we talk about that, unless we make it an issue of the people, how are we going to do this, and how do we do this? Henry, you have to come in on this. And Kavita always raises difficult questions, Henry. So
No, this question is definitely not difficult for me. I only want, and I say it with a lot of humility here because we are in a group of friends here. Using the international mechanisms that were outlined by many people here has cost some of us our entire life. That is the effectiveness of the system. If a Ministry of Home Affairs secretary can have an affidavit filed in our case in Delhi, which Sanjay Parekh is defending me in, and say, this organization is not fit for the FCRA because it communicates with UN Special Rapporteur. That was enough for me. That is the effectiveness of our communications to UN Special Rapporteurs. That is the cost we had to pay, fine. But for what? Because we communicated issues relating to human rights defenders in this country. We paid a price, fine, we paid a price. You did all your investigations, fine. But that is the effectiveness, because it really stings. And therefore, using this system, the UN system, or using international human rights organizations or the diaspora groups that we have today is important in as much as our local issues are spoken about. It is our local documentation that we do here that is important. And it is a little more space and visibility that is created for our domestic work to continue. That is what is important. So for me, the NHRC pressure is for not only the NHRC, but also other institutions in Rajasthan that you are lamenting about, and I am lamenting about the same institutions in Tamil Nadu, which did not care when Suresh was beaten, which did not open its mouth when Suresh was eaten. The state human rights institution has to protect human rights defenders in Tamil Nadu. What did they do? All the members there know Suresh. So these institutions are silent. We raise this voice because we want to continue to wake them up from their sleep. I don't have a hope. I mean, I didn't do this entire process throughout the country and waste much of your times in signing papers, reading papers, putting these rates and all these things and these indexes that are there on torture, on National Human Rights Institution. Why? Because we wanted to shame this institution. And of course, Justice Ramasubramanian, whom I know very well, because he's from Tamil Nadu, has felt ashamed. And it's our duty to make them feel ashamed. So what is the way out? Our way out is our activism here, but our way out is also activating our members of parliament. We have members of parliament who are very sensitive, but those people are not sensitive to the issues, Kavita, that you and I are concerned about. They're not talking about human rights defenders. They're not talking about human rights institutions in the state. They're not talking about the National Human Rights Commission, which did not have for 6 months a chairperson between Dattu and Arun Mishra, and another 6 months between Arun Mishra and Ramasubramanian. They do not talk about a vacancy that has existed for 4 years plus till today of a Supreme Court judge who has to be a member. And 1.5 years, one more. 2 vacancies are continuing. Why are members of parliament quiet? I think this is what this report will be useful to bring it to members of parliament and put pressure on the members of parliament to talk with him. So I think all this work that we are doing outside or inside, what matters is the domestic front, the domestic platforms, and all these issues are domestic issues. UPR, I've never gone abroad for UPR, never. Because I believe the playing ground was here. And we played it well. We played it making all these people ashamed. Imagine 5,000 people, 5,000 groups across, 4,000 in Tamil Nadu alone, because we were able to do it. And simultaneously translating it. UPR came to the people, and people in unions, in women's organizations, in migrant organizations, in fishermen organizations were able to see the lies that the state says there because it was translated into Tamil. You will do it in Hindi, somebody else will do it in Kannada, etc. So I think it is using the international fabric mechanisms for our local issues, which is what really matters. And I think this is the time to remind ourselves that we have one of the youngest UN Special Rapporteur who is a woman, who's from the Dalit community, who's from Karnataka, who is Ashwini, and we are proud that we have her. We are all proud that we have her. And she's bright as ever. And those of you who are following, I think we need to celebrate such people who are from our country, our own people. If it was a man, we would have said many more things. Here is a Dalit woman whom nobody celebrates here in this country. And we need to celebrate Professor Suryadev, who is also from India. And we need to encourage more people. We have our Mihirs and we have our Aravinds and we have our Kavitas. We need you to be UN Special Rapporteurs, because that space will be utilized by many people like you. And I think it is important to speak this and pressurize this. And also DJ Ravindran, who is on the working group on mercenaries. He's also from India. So at present, we have 3 Indians serving there. How many of us are utilizing them? And Ashwini is extremely good. She may be on racism, but she knows how to make the links with other special rapporteurs. And I think that is what is important. So we will continue to use this mechanism, not because we trust this mechanism. I like the words of Pooja on that. We use the system because that gives us a little more space to navigate. And we will use that navigation space as much as possible. This ISHR does some exercise annually. I start laughing. And this is what do you call this now? The UN what report, your reprisals report. It is like some UN award that you get every year. Every year, the Secretary General's report mentions your name there. What the hell? Why do I do it? I do it because there is nobody else fighting the FCRA here in court and legally. So somebody has to fight it. That is the only reason. You think I ever believe that we can get back the FCRA, or I hope that I will get back by FCRA and work? No. But this FCRA struggle has to be fought. I used the NHRC to fight it and showed the entire country, NHRC is not bothered about civil society. So using these opportunities are not for us, not because we trust them, but to expose more and more this state which is becoming fascist in this country. And I think that is the blending that we need to do, but more here than outside. And outside also now we have to do it only from here. There's no UN special rapporteur who was willing to come. Now there's no money for them to come, so nobody will come. So we will have only online meetings. Very good. That means more people, more meetings, more engagement. Only if you go to Geneva, it will become difficult. But if you do it from where we are, it will be very easy. So I feel these are opportunities for us. How can we use these opportunities more and more, particularly with young people in law schools, etc., to start thinking, start using these institutions as much as possible. All the interns, I mean, you are an intern, wala, Kavita. If all your interns, 25, 30 at a time, you run a school there. If all of them are...
So Henry, just responding for a minute, I'm sorry, Lara, to Henry. So I said it because I also had a small plan. Let's take this on 10th December. All of us do something on Human Rights Day. We do it for the week, we do it for the fortnight. We just keep doing it from 10 December to Manusmriti Divas, Dahan Divas. We do it till 25th December, all human rights activities. We begin international activism from 25th. So this is the period to plan something, a plan to give to all organizations in the country that come Human Rights Day, around it, let's make NHRC accountable. And we have to give a few things, add this to your memoranda, add this to your protest, add this to your public meeting, add this to whatever. Your own human rights commission accountable, your state Women's Commission, Human Rights Commission, SC/ST Commission, DNT Commission, Safai Karamchari Commission, all your commissions accountable. So if we can do something like this, then at least what we are saying through a Zoom call with 100 people, we take it to a much larger audience and try to see that something comes. So I feel till you don't shame them and till we don't claim, some of it, once again through struggles, they're shameless. They don't care. That's all. So we need to do something much more here. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. No, Kavita, I think that's a very good proposal. I think PUCL can also, be part of the call, and we can invite other organizations as well. And I think it's a good suggestion to come out of this meeting. We have these points. We've already come up with things that we want, and we've discussed them already. We've got them through the speakers. I think we should make it a, national call, a campaign. And very good suggestion, Kavita. Another thing, of course, like Henry said, we know these processes, what kind of impact they have. There is a question that had come in on the impact, and I do want Arvind and Pooja to, give your comments. There is disillusionment. There is, I have faced it, I think all of us have felt it in some way or the other, in the way we've seen the UN system, fail to, arrest violators, fail to, stop the violations. And there is an expectation right now growing more and more from the UN, also because our states are not responding and because we are, meeting very authoritarian governments. So, in this kind of a scenario, disillusionment is bound to happen. And Prasad also has raised that, how can we be hopeful, or how do we be hopeful about a future of the UN human rights monitoring system, or the UN systems in general in this context? And he's gone to the extent of saying that, or should we start conceiving a post-UN world order? Of course, we don't have anything other than the UN, so it's not like, we have another choice. But these are questions that are coming in the minds of many activists who are coming from, states like ours, we are facing dead ends and walls, and we are trying to, fight through big barriers. In such a system of unaccountability, where India, has been responding so negatively, like I think Sajad also said, you also said, India participates but does not listen, and its response has been like, an attack on the UN. So we have a complete lack of accountability, don't want to be questioned, don't want to be criticized. You'll call it interference. You will say your sovereignty is under attack. And in such a situation, we've also seen the impact. And here I'm just coming to what Henry said. The screenings of the UPR are a very good example. FCRA became a national issue. We saw journalists, forced to report on FCRA, license suspensions and the renewal application rejections. Everybody came to know that so many organizations had lost it, because the UPR process also brought it to the fore, the amount of recommendations that came from other member states on the FCRA violations. I think it did have an impact at the national level in so many ways, because it was also followed by reports by organizations, so many international organizations, Civicus, so many others came up with reports on the issue of FCRA. So there is an impact, especially when we see our own media closing down, when we see our own institutions, failing to question. And our own institutions we have lost independence, right? So we do see the amplification having an impact. We also see the government coming under check and not, becoming watchful of their behavior. These things are important. We also see the same kind of responses from other people who are in power. So how would you want to respond to this? We do have to rely on UN. We don't have an alternative to it. But there is a disillusionment. And what do you feel is the future? I know it's a very difficult question, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on it? I'll first like Arvind to come in. Sorry, Arvind. Sorry, I changed my mind. I'd first like Pooja to come in. And Pooja, after you, I'd like Arvind to come in and, try and also give us some hope. Pooja, if you can come in first.
And Lara, Rohit wishes to speak at some point.
Okay, perfect. Should I call Rohit then, and then do you want to come in, Pooja? Rohit? Rohit, sorry?
Yeah.
Yes,
Unmute.
please.
Yeah. See, I just want to raise two issues. As far as the actions are concerned, the way forward, generally we have a lookout as an organization, as a movement, that we only approach various human rights body unless we have hope to get something out of it. But we don't approach them with the idea to make them accountable and to expose them. So this is one of the crucial point which we have to emphasize, and we have to tell everybody that we don't trust them. And it's not question of trusting them when you approach them. It's also important to expose them. That's why also you have to approach them. So that is one. And second, in terms of documentation, when you are making a plan, so we have to work it out at the state level, city level, that certain complaint, there should be small committee to draft it, polish it, and approach to the commission with the idea to expose them and to put documentation on record. If we don't do that, I think we are keeping them completely out of the picture, and we just say that we don't get anything out of it, so we don't approach them. So I think we should do that first, and that should be our one of the main priority, and we should tell people to do that. That's all.
Totally agree with you, Rohit bhai. I think this is a very important, a very important input, because we cannot let go. We cannot stop holding them accountable. The only way we can do that is to push them more and more for accountability. Pooja, if you'd like to come in on all of this, your closing remarks or thoughts.
Yeah, I will try my best. I think I want to start by also acknowledging the disillusionment, which I also have, and I think has only gotten maybe more amplified since October 2023, when the genocide in Gaza began. So the frustration with the UN system is real, not only in this space, but I think with the vast majority of the human rights defenders with whom we are engaging, who are, I think, asking exactly the same questions that are emerging in this space. There is a visible accountability gap. Powerful states are escaping scrutiny. And at the same time, we're in a moment right now with the UN system where, okay, this is a system that was built by certain states, and those certain states have funded it and they have kept it alive. And now you are seeing a retreat from these states in that particular system. And actually, it's a moment where I think what comes from 2026 and beyond is going to look very different compared to in the past. But at the same time, we have had a record number of applications coming to our training programs also since 2023, because at the same time you are seeing that you are seeing an increasing democratic regression in a number of countries where they're seeing that actually the possibility to advance, I think, a lot of the work nationally is increasingly difficult. And there is a lot of interest in understanding how the tools at the global level work to see actually what they can use globally and bring it back home. And so in that sense, the UN may still create some kind of a political and moral space, even with all of its flaws, because it remains one of the few, maybe only international space where you can still speak truth to power. Yes, okay, with consequence, but it exists in public, on record, and it may have consequence over time, right? There are UN reports, resolutions, special procedures, communications. These outputs can be leveraged. I used the word earlier about leverage for advocacy or litigation or diplomacy that human rights defenders may be able to use to broaden the space at the national or at the local level. Then I think the other thing is also that we have to think a little bit about the UN strategically and not, let's say, romantically, right? Like a lot of expectation management should be done. It is not a place that will deliver justice directly. It is a political platform. We have to use it tactically, use it maybe to document abuses and place it on the record, to build pressure, to open up some channels for protection through the experts processes, urgent appeals or diplomatic follow-up or something like that. So in short, the UN is not the solution itself, but it is part of reaching a solution. I also believe very, very strongly in collective engagement and collective action, coalitions and networks, because it's impossible to do this work alone. And so just coming back again to needing to, I think, strengthen the exchange and the work that we can do together as well in developing the strategies and in developing the tactics and in deciding actually, where do we prioritize and what do we focus on. And then finally, so we just finished actually our office strategy retreat. And this theme about hope and disillusionment was very much a theme in my retreat as well. And what I really liked was I had a colleague who talked about reframing the concept of hope, right? Hope doesn't mean some kind of a blind faith in the work or in a system or anything, but it is a verb, it is a doing word. It is the persistence in using every possible space, every possible opportunity to advance justice. Yeah, so I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Pooja. I think that was a brilliant answer. It actually did do the job I wanted to assign to Arvind of instilling hope. But that's true. It is, an active verb, and we have to treat it as that, and we have to keep at it as well. I mean, hope is the only way that we all will, be able to fight ahead, and things are going to change. I know they're going to change in my lifetime. I'm very clear about it. So I think, how we engage, and that again goes back to what Rohit Bhai said. We have to use these mechanisms tactfully. We have to use them to document. We have to use them to push the envelope and not expect them to be the solution. And I think whether it is the NHRC or the UN, I think the same funda applies. And I'd like Arvind to come in now. Arvind,
Okay.
I had already invited you. Some of your job is done, but you have
some
to.
Some of my job is done. Really
yes, some of your job is done.
But I think
Now we
Prasad,
can talk about it in the constitutional framework.
Prasad put the question quite sharply, which is good. Do we need to think of a post-UN framework? And I'd answer unequivocally, unlike Pooja, who also was going down the path, the answer is no. I'll tell you why my answer would be no. Is because we have to understand the strengths of what the UN system has achieved as well as its weaknesses. And some of it we understand by the people who are under attack. If we see today, the UN system is under attack from the most powerful. Who are the people who most hate the UN system? It's the United States and Israel. Precisely the countries which Prasad says are getting a free hand from the UN are the ones attacking the UN. And you go back again in terms of conceptualization, right? We all know today that what happens in Gaza is genocide, which is an intent to destroy in whole and part national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And that conceptualization comes from the United Nations system. And again, links back to the history. And a really brilliant story again of this guy called Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide. Genos means people, side means kill. And the way he came up with it is because his family died in the Holocaust. And he said the epitaph on my mother's grave will be the Convention Against Genocide. So the concept he came up with is a very important one to understand the gravity and the nature what Israel is doing as far as the Palestinian people are concerned. And that's very important for us to understand. The second point is the person who we all agree, I think, of this room deserves a UN, a Nobel Peace Prize is Francisca Albanese, the special rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. And you look at her work, she has made the case consistently that what Israel is doing in Gaza is genocide against the voices of the most powerful. The only reason we have that space is because of the special rapporteur system and the UN system. That's the strength of the UN system. In terms of, as Pooja rightly put it, giving you the space to make a moral, ethical, and legal case that what is happening to the Palestinians is wrong. If you didn't have it, then it'd be my word versus your word. This is wrong because wrong in my religious tradition, wrong in your religious tradition. How do we come up with a common understanding that what is done is wrong? It's only because of the fact that we have the language of genocide, we have the language of the UN treaties. And that's very, very important. We should not. And it's been sought to be diluted with the most powerful. And we should not be complicit in that and say that it's a post-UN system. That being said, Prasad is right about the question of enforcement mechanisms. The fact that the UN system is flawed is in terms of the gap between the General Assembly and the Security Council, the fact that the General Assembly has no power and the Security Council can stymie every effort. So there is definitely a call for reform of the UN system, 100%. I don't think we should go with the idea of throwing out the UN system. And one last point I'll make, since hope is the thematic which Lara mentioned as well and Pooja brought up. There's a writer called Ernst Frankel who wrote a book called The Dual State. And his argument is that what did it mean to practice law in the midst of the Nazi regime? He's a Jewish lawyer working in Germany and during the height of the Nazi regime. And his point was this: even within the Nazi regime, there is what is the prerogative state, which doesn't abide with the rule of law, and there's the normative state, which is bound to abide with the rule of law. You try your level best to get people within the frame of the normative state. So my sense is the UN system is the normative architecture. That's the language we have to say what is right and what is wrong. And it's a vital and important language that we have. We all struggle with the question of enforcement. And enforcement is the question, again, going back to the idea, human rights are a product of struggle. We have to continue to fight to hold regimes accountable, and that's the struggle which we have before us. And we have to ensure and fight to ensure that the UN system remains accountable to the people who underlie it. Again, you go back to the UDHR. Just one line I want to read from the UDHR, where the preamble says, "It is essential that man is not to be compelled to recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law." So it's absolutely vital. Again, going back to Prasad's earlier point, in terms of SIR, if we don't protect human rights at its core, what you're left is rebellion and oppression. That's what you're left with. So this is vital and very central that we put in all our resources, all our strength to ensure that we protect this normative architecture of human rights, both within the constitutional framework as well as in the UN human rights system.
Thank you, Arvind. I think really important points. Like Pooja said, it is a space for advocacy and documentation. also at a time, and I'd like to add, when our history is being rewritten, when we are seeing a complete, what do you call, manipulation of the narrative, dictated by propaganda. Very important that, we have that space. And second, what Arvind said, that we need this language at a time when, again, I'll add to what you said, the language we need, the human rights language, and to add at a time when our laws are being diluted, when that language is, is being removed from our own domestic systems, right? So I think a very important role that, UN still has. Of course, we know approaching the UN itself, puts us at a lot of threat and risk, and how we do it, and how we are able to communicate will again, be a very important thing to look forward to. We hope the international organizations keep monitoring that and ensuring that, they can support and collaborate in whatever ways that are possible. But thank you, everyone. I think we've had a very good discussion. We were supposed to end at 8. It is 8:35 India time. We have over exceeded, and there are still people in the room. So I'd like to thank each one of you, and thank you also all who have commented, participated, and I hope we can have more discussions on this. I hope we can, try to push the envelope more and more. The more they shrink our rights, we should be able to push even stronger, use all avenues that are possible. And let's try and do it in a tactful and strategic manner without having very high expectations, is what Pooja has reminded us very importantly. So, this is the end of the PUCL session, this dialogue, and we'll have more dialogues. And I think we can stop the recording. Aishwarya, thank you very much.